Hello and welcome to the Improvising Life podcast. This is Lori Crawford, and today we are going to explore how life can be more livable with Karen Page. And this is a special episode because it's our first guest episode in our human design series. And so, Karen is a human design practitioner, and I am so honored to have you here because you have a very personalized, it feels like, approach where you've taken in information and you've decided how does this resonate and work best for me and those I serve. So I'm so honored to have you here. In lieu of reading your very beautifully polished bio first, I'd like to just ask, is there a way that you feel like showing up today and how would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi. Thanks for that, Lori. You know what? I feel super casual, super comfortable. I love just the idea of this being a very extemporaneous, improvised conversation. So I just want to show up like that. Yeah.
Wonderful. And for those who aren't watching this, I want to say I really am loving the color of your top. For at least how I'm seeing, it's like this really earthy yellow, tan brown. I just want to say I feel really grounded. So thank you for that outfit choice today.
Okay, cool. Yeah, this color kind of like has been resonating with me for quite some time. I don't know how to explain it or where it comes from, so I appreciate you saying that because that's also how it makes me feel. So,
Oh, love that. Yeah.
yeah.
And as our first sidebar, I am about 2 weeks into working with someone who's like beta testing an offering of helping people reconnect to the idea of style and it not being something so consumption based, but like how do you actually tend to yourself? And so yeah, I'm in the place of trying to allow myself the ADHD hyperfixation of, oh, what like season color am I? But then reminding myself, oh, you don't have a budget for this. You can't buy everything you're looking at. Leave things in a cart for a week or two and then pick maybe four of them. So yes, I appreciate you saying that you allow yourself to feel drawn to that color, have whatever resonation, yeah, resonation with that because I'm feeling yeah, I'm in that point of urgency does not have to be a part of this. And also there's excitement. So like what is that tango that I'm doing there? So that is how I'm showing up.
Nice.
And so I love to start every episode with a word that was randomly generated, thanks to Google Random Word Generator. And the word that came up for you is passage. So what's coming up for you as you hear passage?
Passage as in like going through something? Like,
Yeah, I believe Passage. I
yeah.
didn't actually double check to make sure there's meaning. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
let's go with that meaning then. That works, you know. What comes up for me when I hear the word passage? Um, I think of things like, the passage of time, like transitioning through something, moving through something, channeling, like that's what comes up for me. And those all feel good. Like those all feel like topics and arenas that I want to explore.
Well, and I love as you started sharing that, my brain thought of, oh, another like nuance of passage is like a reading passage. And since we're talking about human design, readings are a part of it. And so I just want to hold that as a tangent over here of that, how a passage can be a reading, but how human design will also be a relationship with time and some and transitions and experiences. So I just love that. There's all those little tendrils, and those can just sort of stay wherever you want them to, and then come in and out of the space as they do or don't. And I want to acknowledge a literacy moment that our listeners may not yet know what human design is. So I like to think or try to have a practice of sharing it as it's a practice that is several indigenous and ancient modalities that a white dude who was misogynistic and on drugs channeled and wove together. So I like to preface that and also love for you to share however you relate or don't relate with the idea of human design as a system.
Okay, so I like to think of first of all, when I'm trying to explain human design, I kind of switch up the explanation based on who my audience is, right? So I kind of have like a few different ones that I want to choose from. But lately, what has been resonating with me is that it's a mixtape of concepts that blend ancient wisdoms and modern science, right? And so, we're thinking of astrology, the Hindu chakra system, the Kabbalah tree of life, astrology. um, quantum physics, epigenetics, biochemistry, all this stuff is like meshed up, all these concepts that already existed. And essentially, what that allows you to do as an individual is explore yourself and understand, who you are, what your aura is, what your energy is, how your energy relates to the outer world and other people's energies. And then through that, understanding how to work with all of that energy through a strategy. You could look at life as a game, but also turning to yourself as an authority figure that you can look to help you figure out how to best move through life.
I I'm gonna chew on that for like a decade. I love that. I'm like, I have taste cognition, right? So I'm like very, I'm not more slowly. But the things that I'm still like, the flavors I'm really, really resonating with. I love the idea of a mixtape because that is so accessible for someone to have a relationship with that on its own. And I also love that you brought in epigenetics. That is one of the layers and facets that I seldom ever hear brought into the space. So I just want to uplift that as well because so I know from the past week of creeping on you on threads in your bio just to get more familiarized. So I want to preface that this is a not a long passage of time, right, since we've been aware of each other, but of your commitment to not only doing intersectional work, but also as a practice of collective liberation. And so I just appreciate that you, in your definition and sharing out with people, that you would include that. And just one thing that was coming up as well is I found myself at times sharing it to people as, we hear this idea of, oh, God created everyone equal, or like, and so air quote, God, source, creator, energy, whatever resonates with that person. It's like, if that is true, how does that actually look and feel and happen? And I find that human design is one of the ways that we can have that relationship with. If I was never told as a child to be X, Y, and Z and was allowed to know myself the way that I came into the world knowing, what would that relationship with self and then relationship with others look like? So all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I will just hop in here too as a neurodiverse person. This is where I want to just like literally like continue what you said and respond directly to what you said, but also notice, can we just leave it there and maybe move on to something else? You know what I mean? So I'm just gonna allow that to be. But also that makes me curious because we didn't talk about each other's human design yet. Is it okay if I know what your aura type is? Because that will help me
Yes.
understand how to communicate
Is it,
with
I
you.
usually share profile lines too. Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
I'm a 3/5 mental projector.
3-5 mental projector. Okay.
And so I've had an ajna and then
Hmm.
everything. Yeah.
Everything below the head
Well,
of the
and
ajna
of
is
the rest, I have three fully open and then four are undefined.
okay. Okay. So invitations are good. Asking you questions is good.
Yes. And do you
Um,
have your sacral defined? Just so
yeah,
I
I
know.
do.
Two yes, nos. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a 6-2 sacral generator, but I have 6 open or undefined centers. So I've got
Okay.
a very similar openness potential
This.
to like
Yes.
a projector per se. But yeah, so if you want to ask me questions, give me options, that would feel really good.
Yes.
And I know that I can ask you questions, invite you in, and ask you to guide
Absolutely. And
me.
what's
So
funny is I usually don't, the only prep I do ahead of time is more of accessibility to make sure that, guests have the link and all that. But I was actually drawn to have questions at a few just like thoughts that come up through the week and try my best to write them as yes, nos. Just at this feeling that perhaps you had a circle. So I'm like, oh, look, I acknowledge that. So my cute little printout here. But yeah, and again, this is just for my ADHD to have some idea of focus, but we don't have to do anything with it. Um, and one of the question that I am most drawn to share is, does your human design knowledge support your self and community care practices? Which assumes you have those practices, but
yeah, that's a great question, by the way. That is a really juicy question. I love it. Does my human design support my community care and self-care practices? Was that the question?
yes.
Um, it does. And if anything, it actually helped me create better self-care practices. So To kind of go back to what you were saying earlier, my whole thing with personal development, whether it's human design or whatever, is that any work that we're doing starts within and radiates out, right? So that's why there's this really beautiful relationship between what's happening with us individually and how that can have a ripple effect for the collective. So when I first started studying my human design, a lot of it really didn't connect with me because typically as a generator, we're referred to as the worker bee or a type, like work, 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 go, go, go. And that really did not resonate with me because I was always so tired and so exhausted. And I even remember when I had my first human design reading, after about a year and a half of self-study, one of the things that came up was I'm so tired. And the reader who then became my mentor was like, you literally, I can hear it in your voice. Like if you don't change your ways, you're gonna end up in the hospital, right? And I was like, okay, this resonates. So then once I got an understanding of, okay, I might have be a sacral being and traditional human design might tell me that I'm supposed to be a worker bee. The rest of my chart has so much openness and so much like so many undefined centers that it's no wonder I'm so tired because the rest of me wants to rest. The rest of me is like an open window that's just taking in the energy from my outer world, that's taking in the emotional energy, the mental energy, the thought processing, like the talk, all of it, right? And so my sacral is like kind of like, hey, I want to go. I'm just activated. I'm turned on, but the rest of my body is like, no, 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 no. You need a rest, right? So it wasn't until I kind of went beyond those basic things of like aura type, profile lines, strategy, and authority, and started to look at all the complicated stuff in the body graph where I was like, okay, now my human design resonates. And now I know that I need to do things that support all of that openness, support the sensitivity, the like just literally it's like sometimes I feel like a house with all the windows and the doors just wide open and the wind just, the air just keeps coming in. And at a certain point, you have to like close up shop and rest, so to speak. So in that regard, human design has been really supportive. And then I think through my own journey with rest, also like my deconstruction, my decolonization work, I just feel like all of us living under capitalism, we all need to be resting because it's one of the most revolutionary things we can do. I've been able to really put a lot of emphasis on rest in the work that I do, um, and what I talk about online. And when I look at someone's chart when I'm doing a reading, I'm automatically like, okay, but how much are you resting though? But how much are you grounding? But what's up with your boundaries? But how are you using your energy in a day? And is that actually serving you, or is there some stuff where that needs to be changed so that you don't feel like you're operating on all systems go full cylinders all the time? So I'm really grateful to studying my own human design for all of that.
Yeah, thank you for not only giving people the opportunity to self-reflect within your sharing, but also speak from that experience. Because one of the things that I find the most challenging to continually encounter in the human design mainstream space is the amount of everything has to be taken exactly as the words were channeled, right? So there's this like closing off of the actual what does this mean to me? And then also and one of the other questions was was, like acknowledging that so many access barriers. So let's assume someone has the birth details they need to get their chart, their specific time, all of that. Let's say that that barrier's already been crossed. So often, it's to me, I think overemphasized to start with type strategy and authority. And I work with a lot of people who are they're in a situationship with their body and spirit and mind instead of a relationship. And that's because that's my experience that I'm about 5, 6 years into recovering and healing from, and acknowledging that um, that dysfunction has come to be because of systems of oppression, and also as a white woman, the way that I learned it and was expected to be disembodied from my family of origin was also to not feel the sensory and visceral discomfort of being the oppressor. So acknowledging that, like, actually having a relationship with my body, my spirit, and my mind, which human design helps facilitate for me, really is, um, so my ADHD, yes. So what I found was more helpful than being like, "Oh, I'm a mental projector," and only starting there, which was really overwhelming because when you see the chart even, it's like authority, none. I first off, I should not have Googled it for the first time at 3 AM. I'm sobbing in bed. There's nothing special about me. Right? Just like the most fuck shit's happening. But what I found about 3 or 4 months in was someone mentioning PHS, which is the primary health system. So once I dug into that, I resonate much more with cognition, which I think was is your spidey sense, so which sensory ability is the most perceptive, or if people weren't dampening your sort of energetic style, what you would have the most easeful access to. And then environment and determination, which I find helpful to think of as digestion. So how is not only food, but information, content, media, energy coming in and out. And I found that those three things were the most helpful for me because there's then that relationship between body, spirit, and mind. And to me, that's where I get to have that be built into my self-care and community care practices. And what even is the idea of embodiment? What even is the idea of setting boundaries? What even is the practice of committing to being coachable and correctable and understanding that I'll never be unproblematic, because that then makes me super problematic because I'm not going to be correctable. So all of those fears are coming up. But yeah, so do you have any other ways that you, when you're working with someone, that you offer a way for things to be not only approachable, but to be, again, that it's about your practice with what you're learning about your energy?
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer that there's more than one entry point to self-discovery, to personal development. I think the same thing is true for human design. And you mentioned earlier that, in mainstream human design, there's like this emphasis on really staying true to the original written word. And I'm like, okay, but as someone who is very well versed in the core characteristics of white supremacy culture, I know that only one right way to do things upholds that. And I also know that worship of the written word upholds that. And so I know that the antidotes to those are to realize that there's more than one way to do things. And that's okay. And that lived experience is just as valuable as what's written on the page, what's in the passage, right? So um because of that, when I'm doing a reading, okay, let me back this up. So recently I just kind of landed on something like, if people are getting really stuck on the jargon and the vocabulary of human design, right? And I know for me, my learning style, what I've noticed is if you're stuck on your brain trying to define what the word is, you might miss the meaning of the word, or like having the experiential understanding of the overall conversation, because you're like, what does authority mean? Now I can't stop thinking about authority. And it's like, okay. So I try to be really mindful of like when to bring in that really discursive language and when to just talk about it like a regular, conversational human being, right? So through that, one of the things that I landed on recently was, okay, if you're really stuck on all this language, the aura type, the all this stuff is just like not clicking for you, let's try a different way. And so one thing that might be helpful is actually to look at like your signature emotions and your not self emotions in human design, because that was my entry point into it. And the reason why I like to start there is, you know, hopefully, hopefully you have an idea of what it feels like, or you can identify theoretically anger, disappointment, frustration, bitterness, um yeah, anger, frustration, bitterness, disappointment. Those are like the main four not self emotions. Now on the flip side, and when I say not self emotions, I mean for everybody in human design, if you're feeling one of those things based on what your aura type is, that's really an indication that the vibe is just off for you. Whatever's happening here, it's not really in alignment, and something needs to be reflected on and most likely changed, right? Um, so I like to say, okay, depending on what your aura type is, they're going to tell you that your not self emotion is one of those four things, right? So let's just start there. Are you familiar with that sensation? Have you ever had a time in your life where you felt frustrated, where you felt angry? Okay, what was going on there? Let's talk about that. Let's explore, let's get curious. Um, and then through that, it's like, okay, in dialogue, I start listening to people talk, and then it's like, okay, now I can point to your human design. That part, well, that's actually over here, and you can see it over there too, and et cetera, right? So we start there. And then something that I don't think gets talked about often enough in human design is the signature emotions, where when you're feeling those, that's actually an indication that things are going well. You're using your energy in a way that's really correct for you. Whatever you're doing, keep doing more of that, right? So depending on your aura type, it's either going to be satisfaction, peace, surprise, or success for my projectors, but I also give it the caveat of not the toxic capitalist version of success, okay? Your definition, your personal.
Hashtag define everything yourself.
Right, right. So all of that is to say, by the way, I have a completely undefined throat center, which means I could talk. So if you don't interrupt me, I will keep going until I'm ready to stop. But I've recently been liking to start with the emotional piece of it and getting curious. Curiosity is something that I cherish about myself, asking questions as opposed to assuming. And just being, well, like, tell me more about that. What was that like? Da, 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 all this kind of stuff, right? So, um, I find that that can be a very um, low barrier to entry for someone if they're like literally just sitting in front of their chart for the first time and they don't have any books or blogs or online courses that's explaining this is what this means and that's what that means. And again, that's based on what was helpful for me, because when I first looked at my chart, I didn't understand any of that stuff. But I zoned in and I saw this little phrase, not self, emotional theme, frustration. And like my whole life flashed before my eyes, just like in the movies. And I was like, I have literally been frustrated my entire life. That it feels like my default emotion. So if you're telling me there is a system for personal development that can show me something else than being frustrated all day, like, say less. I'm in. What's next, you know?
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm really thinking about, so a lot of my work is acknowledging and trying to heal from and address and disrupt intergenerational cycles of harm. And often that then brings in family of origin into the conversation. And in my own reflections and work with my human design energy, now understanding and knowing that I have a fully open solar plexus, spleen, and identity center. And knowing that now, like my husband, my husband's a 5/1, an emotional manifester, but so is my dad. So my dad having no fucks to give about energy stuff, we didn't know it, and arguably he probably wouldn't be his thing, um, even now. And how much I'd amplify his anger, like I would feel that, and so when my body couldn't hold all of that anger, and I would be sobbing because just a voice was raised telling I'm too emotional. And then realizing, well, it's actually because my physical body cannot contain and process this. So I would sort of layering in the fact that my not self emotion is bitterness, and my taste cognition, right? Now I use the language and it resonates with like the idea is always stewing in everyone else's emotions. I was doing it was like the frog who couldn't jump out of the pot in that story because the water's already boiling it to death. That was my lived experience. And it's so easy for me to slip back into that. Let me preface, human design is not like a, like, cure all, now I'm like fixed, right? It's not white savory in that idea of if I just find the right thing about myself to fix, then all is well in the world. And I can go back to being on a different version of adulting on autopilot, as I like to think of how most of us are functioning. But yeah, so like seeing that, I just appreciate you bringing up that signature energy and the emotional component, because having two parents with sacrals who didn't know, or emotional, sorry, two emotional authorities, and then also my mother had, being a generator, having that sacral that she also was not allowed to ever know or trust in her life. And so then feeling her frustration. And so, yeah, so I say all that to say that I've really found a lot of the people that I've supported um, are looking for and needing space to be held to just al- to allow the body to actually acknowledge that there's been something they've been stewing in probably their whole life, that oftentimes what they were told was quote wrong about them was actually their caregivers projections onto them, whether they have that fifth a two or a five in their profile lines or not, right? That perhaps is sort of affects the depth of how much those words or feelings cut into them perhaps. But oftentimes and when, we get to a place of acknowledging that even if it was normalized around us that that dysfunction and that harm was supposed to happen or it was okay that it was happening, even if our mind has learned and been expected to rationalize it, our body is like, oh, you tired, you're exhausted, you've been dysfunctioning, like don't add more to your plate. Say no to everything. Go find a blanket, eat some pierogies, get a chocolate milk, like whatever it is, right? And that those ways that our body and our energy and our spirit might know how to best access, us being less raggedy has just never been an option. So for me, I really find that it feels so tragic and sad when, um, in the human design space in particular, we're told like telling, oh, you have a sacred authority, just trust your gut. Bitch, who's gut? Have I been allowed to do that? When I was 4, I trusted that, and then I was told that I was going to be left at the grocery store. Like, there's just no space held for lived experience or nuance or how we've learned to actively target what being ourselves feels like because being, at least in my experience, being myself put me most at risk of additional harm. I'm going to
Yeah.
mute myself now because I get all zesty. So, do you have something to
Yeah.
respond to that? Yeah.
I do. And it feels like also just a good time, kind of like speaking of the body, like reset the body, let the energy and the feelings feel and be emotion. And I'm happy to talk while you like reset and do what you need to do, right? Um, so much came up that in what you said that I wanted to respond to, but like what really feels top of mind first, or like what wants to come forward, is I love talking about energy centers next, right? So you mentioned the emotional solar plexus, um and the relationship that you had with someone who had a defined emotional solar plexus, whereas did you say yours is completely open?
Yeah, completely
Yeah,
open.
so is mine, right? And so it's there's a lot that's coming up for me, but basically where I wanted to go with that is, you know, I think people come in to start studying human design really to get to know themselves. But then what ends up happening in literally like every conversation I've had, every reading I've done, people feel validated in their lived experience. And I almost always end up using the phrase, well, it's no wonder that dot, 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 XYZ, right? It's no wonder that as a child growing up in a household where your parent had a completely defined emotional solar plexus and probably didn't have the tools to process emotions in a very like constructive supportive way, and you being a completely open emotional solar plexus, you're like a sponge, feeling their feelings, like taking that in and feeling that without the language or the tools of emotional boundaries. But all of that is to say, it's like, people have these very contemplative reflections where it's like, you know, what is that about? And I'm like, well, not to be bypassing, but one, it's not a coincidence that someone who is that wide open was in relationship at a very young age with someone who was that defined. And that was part of like the learning journey. But now as an adult and in the reparenting process, you get to be like, okay, well, I have more choice here. I get to decide. Um, and how do I want to proceed knowing this about myself? What do I want to do for my own healing work, but also validating that, yeah, that was really hard. And it's no wonder why I might have difficulty having difficult conversations because I don't really want to feel what the other person is feeling, because I'll actually take it in, and maybe I don't know how to discharge that at the end of the day. I'm just going to hold myself in a lot of compassion because it's right there in my chart. You're someone who feels the emotional energy of the outer world. There's nothing wrong with, like, that's the other piece, is like there's no, you're not built wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. There's no aura type that has it better or easier than someone else, you know? But the energy centers, again, that really stuck out for me. And so again, that's something that I like to focus on, because it's like, they're all kind of working together like a council or like a team, and they're communicating with each other, and it's like all of is this, when you put it all together, it's you as a beautifully unique person with your own strengths, with your own areas to focus on healing, which I think is also really cool. Like, you can look at your human design chart and be like, okay, well, if you have a completely open emotional solar plexus, one of the things that's probably going to be really helpful for you in your journey is learning how to have difficult conversations instead of avoiding them. So what does that mean to you? What's the baby step that you can take to just, have that? And what I found, part of that is realizing you get to say what you need to say, and how the other person receives that is their responsibility to manage their own emotions. And so fortifying yourself and being rooted in your truth allows you to have those difficult conversations, because for all intents and purposes, you're probably having that conversation with a full grown adult, fully responsible and capable. And like, what's the alternative? You continuing to swallow all of those other emotions and like sit with that until your body aches, and like, whatever else you're doing to self-soothe. Oh, you know what I mean? So it's like, okay, well, again, it's just the blueprint. You have free will. You can do whatever you want. But this is just kind of showing you like some cheat codes, but also like some backstory. So you get to do with that what you like.
Okay, so exciting. So our random number time to pop in, because you just said backstory, and I picked a random number from 1 through 6 earlier, and we got 6. And the sixth tool of improvising is I've got your back. So you just said the word, and through that, this idea that if we're able to not only have a relationship with ourselves, but with others, where the focus is having each other's backs, we don't actually then have to be in the extent of survival mode we've been expected to be, because I don't have to worry about self, because I know that you're looking out for my humanity, because you know, and this is obviously with people that you have a relationship with. The world the way it is does not mean if I go to Walmart right now that every person there is going to feel this way about me. Acknowledge that, right? But in the relationships that we are stewarding, including the one with ourselves, if we have room and capacity and language to have the other person's back with that agreement that they have ours as well, it really demystifies, or really just invalidates that whole pull yourself up by your bootstrap. Oh, we don't even have boots, right? Like that part. I always say that to myself when I can feel that energy coming back, where I'm like, no, that is me dehumanizing myself, right? And just as you were sharing too, when you were talking about choices, it was really reminding me of a lot of the like a principle that really informs my approach to being of service. So like, what would it be like if we had access to choices we actually want to make? Because so much of existing within the systems of oppression we exist in are these pseudo choices of, oh, you work or you don't work. It's like, okay, you're asking me to have my basic needs met or not. And then reality now under capitalism, you could also work and still not have your needs met, right? There's just all these ways that you don't really have choices that feel choice based. Um, and yeah, so I really appreciated you bringing that up. Um, and sort of on that side tangent of thinking about choice, I'm just reminded of so often people talk about inner child and their inner child work, but I'm a really firm believer that reparenting our inner parent is so important, because that to me, inner parent is really that sort of dense soup version of all of the interactions and voices and exchanges we had from any adult when we were growing up, whether that's a parent, a caregiver, or whatnot, media, all of those things get sort of pressure cookered into how we look at ourselves. And then from that place that we are often in a sort of autopilot reaction outward towards each other. So now that I'm a parent, you know, and I'm doing obviously outer parenting of another human, and she's has emotional authority, right? Having those moments of being like, how beautiful is it that I am able to disrupt the degree of harm that I'm causing as a parent when because I have human design as something where I can look and say, oh, I'm feeling her emotional wave start. I'm feeling overwhelmed. That's my cue to say, mommy's body is feeling a lot. I'm taking a breath, you know, taking ownership of everything and directing it about me. And to the extent possible, because I am human, noting that the amplification is happening and not making her the steward of my emotions, right? So in the moments where it has just physically been so much, if you know, and it's just and really just because of how many genocides are happening in the world, like there's just moments where all of life tears are going to come out because that's the best way for me to process it. And I see her, you know, coming in and checking on me. It just feels so beautiful to be able to have the words and the practice of saying, I so appreciate you checking in on me, and my emotions are not your responsibility. Thank you for checking on me. I notice you checking. I'm going to do this X, Y, and Z to take care of myself. And sure, she's 2.5, and people might say, "Why the fuck are you talking to a baby like that?" She's a full human, and if haven't practiced that since day one of her life, do I think just suddenly when she's like 15, you know, I'm going to just undo 15 years overnight of like not being in that place of yeah, in that practice. Okay, so now I'm going really rambly, so I'm going to pause. It's just like, I love that ability though, and I think what I'm indirectly getting at, and with your shares, we've also been getting at is the ways that human design can be such a leverage tool that not only can yes and your lived experience, but also inform then the way that you are navigating life moving forward, whether that's with yourself and or with others. That it really like I any of the modalities or practices that I use, I'm always asking myself, how can I make it so clear to whoever I'm working with that the whole point of this all is for you to feel like these tools are yours to go do whatever or not do anything with. And so,
Mhm.
like, you know, you really spoke to earlier the gatekeeping that happens when white supremacy culture is asking for a definitive truth, one right thing, everything else wrong like that, and disrupting those patterns.
Yeah, I going back to what you were saying about like what was coming up for me as you're talking about the communication that you're now having with your own child, but also knowing that when you step outside your door, the strangers that you're encountering might not eh, be coming from the same place that you're coming from. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of again like two of the major things that have helped me through human design is one, it's to help reinforce this idea that like it takes all kinds and everybody's on their own journey. And it's actually really magical when you get to have an awareness maybe of how you're communicating with someone in your own family and understanding what their needs are, but also understanding what your needs are. And so now you're like connecting and literally like plugging into each other to create this really beautiful experience that's different than what has happened in the past, right? But also having this awareness that maybe not everybody knows that or will ever know tools of personal development and self-reflection, and that's okay. um they're on their own journey and like literally it takes all kinds, you know what I mean? Like there's learning moments from that, and also you get to just say, hey, I hold the most compassion for you, stranger, even though I might not even say that to your face, like because it's not required, but like I just like overall what I'm getting at is it's really kind of helped me understand that like everybody is going through something and we may never know what it is. That's why if I'm just pushing my cart in Walmart and you bump your cart into mine, like I'm not gonna flash and have an altercation with you because you're probably going through something. And I know about myself that energetic boundaries really help me. So I've reinforced that for myself. So you bumping into my car actually doesn't affect me in the way that it would years ago. You know what I mean? So it's like all these little like micro moments of exchanges of energy that ultimately do create momentum and build up into something. And like things are shifting, things are changing. And sometimes, like, even just knowing, even just having an awareness of all of that, like the very, like everything everywhere all at once type of thing, is enough to like let you just let some shit go and, but also like learn some shit at the same time. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. And I just want to full circle back earlier of you speaking to ripples, right? That, how can any kind of personal development, whether that's human design or not, be something that can resource you and be like nutritive for your practice with self, and how that then leads to those ripples, right? And this is making me think of one of the other um, little question thoughts I had down too about how, in my experience, and I would say about 75% of the people that I have supported through human design specifically have been white women. Not surprising, I'm a white woman, right? Having that moment of noticing, oh, okay, so that's who is coming to me. But in those sessions in particular, how often human design is being approached as, can this help fix me?
Mm, I gotta
And
hop in.
yeah,
I
so no,
gotta
go
hop
ahead.
in.
So because I just, it was coming up to me, just like mention that where it's like I've seen it as like a, can this fix me? So I will defer to you to respond, because I felt your energy be like, oh.
Yeah, yeah. And so back to the thing of like trust your gut and da, da, da. My sacral is like my whole body will just kind of move, or like something comes out. So that's an example of like my sacral getting activated by what you just said. And so my whole approach to this is like y- you are not wrong. You were not designed wrong. Probably what happened is when you were a little bitty baby, like 7 years and younger, probably even 3, you were moving through this world the way that is correct for you. And somebody came in and told you, don't do that. Don't behave that way. That's not correct for someone of your gender, your race, your class, whatever, your ability, whatever. And then the journey, once you can, people like to say, like, once you learn your human design, like it's a deconditioning process, da, 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 da. That is true. And also, but once you kind of, again, start to study your human design, you'll feel the sense of validation that you've always been who you needed to be. It's actually you understanding that the world is fucked up and that the world needs to be fixed. And that the more you actually embody your magic and your energy, that will radiate out and help fix the world ultimately. Um, if anything, human design will just show you the areas that you can focus on through tender, compassionate healing, like what we talked about earlier with the emotional solar plexus and difficult conversations, right? But I don't think anybody needs to be quote unquote fixed, because then the implication is that there's a perfect version of you, and we reject perfectionism on the grounds that it's rooted in white supremacy culture, right? And patriarchy, especially if you're coming into this work as someone who identifies as a woman. We know that perfectionism is major for women, and it's totally rooted in patriarchy, right? And so herein lies the thing of my approach, the intersectional approach, the anti-oppression approach, um, you know, that intersection of race, class, gender, ability, all of the marginalized identities, is like, you're not wrong. The outer world is wrong. And yeah, what I will say though, back to the piece where you're saying, I get a lot of white women working with me who want to do human design. That is the work that I would offer to anyone who's white who's listening to this, is your human design deconditioning is directly connected to anti-racism work, to decolonization, deconstructing oppressive systems. And like, I'm just going to leave it at that. So again, whatever your entry point is, you can find connections for the bigger picture. But individually, you're not wrong, boo. You're not made wrong.
Thank you so much for all of that. That in itself feels like a full course meal. I so appreciate that too. And that's often, and I appreciate because you helped me reflect back on how I navigate those moments. And often I found myself just sort of intuitively going into that difficult conversation and saying that, um, how would your life be better if you flip that lens outward? So what is wrong around me that is making it feel like my humanity is not accessible or allowed? And hopefully it was in less jargony terms than that, but just that I feel like that's a zoom lens that has been put into you. I don't believe that, insert baby name of whoever. So like baby Monica, right? Like I don't think little Monica inside of you one day said, we're wrong with, we're what's wrong in our life. You were told that, and in trying to hold
Mhm.
that space. And everything you're sharing too, it brings up so cute how these questions are coming up, and it's like I just love that they were sort of the things that, but so much in human design is talk about individuation, right? Without the room for that nuance of like community. And it just reminds me of this one human design person that I found I was randomly made aware of through YouTube. Like YouTube was just like, look at this, right? So it's not someone that I um was in the part of human design where I see really on social media in the way that it was not a loud voice, is what I'm getting at. But the algorithm said, oh, look, human design, look. And the very first thing I heard them talk about was about the Rave Mandala. So, like, this is sort of a deeper part of human design that you don't ever have to look at it if you don't want to, right? But essentially, it's a facet that says, here are all the 64 gates or potential energies that exist. And what their argument was that like you have to be this like pioneering, pull yourself up by the bootstrap esque. Like it was just very white supremacist uplifting. Like you have to do that because it's it's like
Yeah.
reinforcing the you versus them. And I literally like found their emails and wrote them this email back. I was like, you're actually missing the whole ass point of having 64 gate entries, like the whole mandala possible. Because what happens is when people have the fucking space and systems aren't making it impossible to live, you have access to being your full ass self, which then means the whole like cosmos of energy is possible, right? It's just like the almost like a litmus test of when everyone has access to being themselves, then everything is represented. It's not about being self because you're not all these other things. It's like, oh fuck, the more that I'm myself, the more someone else is their selves. And how might the world be if everyone was just allowed to be themselves? Difficult conversations were had, relationships were repaired, people were looking at community as being vital. I just remember at that moment of being like, oh, I'm okay, checked with my own boundaries. I'm totally okay expending the energy in this moment because if I at least don't try to have this conversation with someone, I'm signing off on it being okay that harm is happening with what message they're sharing out. And so I
Mhm.
just like, yeah, just for anyone who's listening who's has those types of moments where it's like, it's okay to say, do I have the capacity for this? It's okay if the answer is no. But if the answer is yes, what are those boundaries or how much energy can I put towards this? And especially for any white women listening, we aren't owed comfort in the world. So, just fucking get uncomfortable. Sure,
Mhm.
you can be exhausted because of all the intersectional what things that you're navigating. Like, yes, but also like take on some emotional labor for the world. Just do it. Sure, I self-medicate with cookie dough all the time. I have emotional support bagels, right? I know the things that will get me through. But like if we're only looking at comfort as separation from doing what's right for all,
Mhm.
right? Then that isn't something that we're owed. And just like one last thing before I share over too, it's
Yeah.
like the broader part about this question or this thought about individuation is like, how do you see human design being supportive of liberation work? You've already talked about it, but I just want you
Yeah.
to be able to, from the mountaintops, six line it, right? What all do you want to share about that?
Listen. Listen, first of all, I just want to say if you're calling people in on their own harm that they're basically like complicit in through human design, keep going with that. Like use your white allyship, your co-conspiratorship, your privilege to get into those spaces and point those things out. Um, I would say that again, if you're, listen, white supremacy culture is not a shark we can swim away from and we'll be safe. It's the water we all swim in, right? So if you're bringing those core characteristics of that into your practice to understand yourself, you're missing the point, right? So I would say if you're not already familiar with those core characteristics of white supremacy culture, which include things like power hoarding, gatekeeping, perfectionism, individualism, get into that and reflect on how that shows up in your life, but also how it shows up to how you're even exploring yourself through human design, right? And so that's what I mean about using it as a tool for liberation. Going back to what you were saying, is the more each of us can individually be our true selves and put that energy into the world, it does collectively radiate because it empowers other people to do the same for themselves. But also, if you're just using human design, like any wellness practice, any spiritual practice, if you're just using it to make your life better, to get your 6, 7 figure life, to get your mega yacht, to get your like Mercedes Benz, whatever, you're also missing the point. You're also missing the point, right? And so, like, I've done talks, but I'll keep it brief. I've done talks where I've essentially looked at white supremacy, looked at patriarchy, looked at capitalism, and then looked at human design and been like, where are these things not cohesive? Right? You go through human design, things will start coming up like releasing urgency, releasing hyper productivity, releasing the need to go out and make things happen, resting more, receiving more, trusting in right timing. Like all of these things are like clashing to these oppressive systems. And so ultimately, again, like I'll just what I said at the top, it starts within and it works its way out. But if you're just keeping it about you and making your life like Instagram worthy, it's like a manifestation, babe, you're missing the point. And I invite you to also go back and study the core characteristics of white supremacy culture just as much as you're trying to figure out what does strategy, authority, and profile lines mean, you know?
Those not seeing the clause is round and round. No, me too. And it's just bringing me back to that and providing tool number 6 of I've got your back, right? If we are able to be in relationships where there is room for repair and where there's room for everyone to reorient back to what it feels like to be themselves, and that there's grace and love and opportunity for all that to happen, human design can be one of the practices that then facilitates that, but also is how to have each other's back, right? So even in this moment, just to sort of weave together some things for some listeners, in case your brain just like mine and triangulates 8,000 things at once. The way when you asked, oh, what type, and I shared once project, and you said, oh, invitations, right? That's a way that you're saying, oh, I know this about human design, and now I can hold space for you. So and then me knowing, oh, you have that sacral response. So if I phrase things as yes, no questions, when my brain slows down enough, I can, your sacral gets that opportunity to respond, right? These are these micro moments where that understanding of just one system or one practice creates room to actually be ourselves in that exchange. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would really love to encourage people to, like again, play with all of this, but also think of it at like play through the lens of a child. Play is the only work or job of a child. I love that saying, right? It's like play is something so important. It's not this idea of something dismissive or optional. So like have practices, right? If you're finding yourself being really called into a certain aspect of your design, yes, and the shit out of that, right? Like if you're just like, oh, I really like the fact that the identity center is a different, the shape of that triangle is pointing a different way, that can fucking be enough, right? It doesn't have to be anything other than you're attracted to the fact that it's a smaller triangle and it's pointing downward. Like, wow, look at that. Like, it gets to be something that is so self-informed. And
Yeah.
also, too, like, I really appreciate the different facets of how you brought in uh renouncing perfectionism, right? Like there is no right or correct way to learn your design. There's not a best and only way to embody it. Can all of this just be a invitation, an opportunity, a moment of that, of a breath of like, oh, all of the fuck shit is around me. I don't have to be and perpetuate it.
Yes. Yes, and I will say this though, like it's not just the outer world, you know what I mean? Like we're human beings. We're responsible for our actions, our behaviors, our thoughts, our we may have certain intentions, but it may impact others in different ways. So it's also about knowing that too. You know,
Oh, absolutely.
we talked a lot about the openness in your energy or your aura type, which may make you susceptible to the outer world. But there's also the definition and the active gates, which are the channels, which are the energy that you're putting out there, babes. You know what I mean? So you have to
Yeah,
have an awareness of that too, and know that your energy can also be impacting other people. So act responsibly. You know,
absolutely.
that's the other magic
Yes.
of human design too. And then ultimately, yeah, I say there's so much to human design that unless you wanted to become a practitioner yourself, you don't got to know all of it. You just got to take what works for you. And then, hey, if you're like, yeah, human design's cute, but I'm really more of an astrology person, or I'm really more of, like a somatics person, go off, like do what you want. And again, just realize the magic is you having a toolkit of all kinds of different tools, and human design is just one of them. It's not the only one.
Yes, and on that note, I just want to bring in my mentor, Felicia Savage Friedman, in the space because one of the literally thousands of um Felicia gems that are just always so beautifully available into my brain is really looking at so I went through her 200-hour anti-racist social justice yoga teacher training, and one of the core tenets that she has in her curriculum and her work is if especially as for white people, she's a black woman, but for the white people in the class, we've specifically had additional um, prompts and work to do to look at if any one practice or modality we're looking at to rehumanize ourselves, that then is a facet of white supremacy. And so, how can we acknowledge that, yes, we might know of something, we'll use yoga, and the example of like, oh, okay, we know it, but it's from this very Western, whitewashed, and problematic lens. We may not know ancestrally something that was a practice, but we have to find and go through the effort of finding a humanizing practice that we do that has something to do with our actual family of origin or ancestry. So I just wanted to bring her into that space
Mhm.
and that because human design also can, again, because it's built off of these ancient practices and cosmologies, it can then be very easy for people to look at. And I'm constantly checking myself with this too, right? I'm not othering myself from white people. Like I have to remind myself constantly, like if I'm only trying to humanize myself through this one aspect, then that again is where I can get caught up in my mental and ajna definition, my krana ajna, and then be less accountable for the impact of where I'm spending my time thinking and sharing out. So I just wanted to bring her into into the space as well. Um, yeah, because the tools she equipped me with, I'm so grateful I received them right as I was first learning human design. And so
Mhm.
just that reminder of like if all of our lived experience is valid because it's our lived experience, like there are ways that we can be ascending ourselves through that. So like bring that with you on your human design journey and your work.
Yeah.
There might be some people that say now you know this, so this is the best thing to go with. No, it doesn't have to be like that.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Lori. I'm just gonna say yes. yes to that.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, I can tell that we are now just past our hour mark because I my car office is getting a little dark, so that I'm acknowledging that. So the last thing that I always like to do is just again give you that opportunity to share out. So for anyone who wants to look like the literal links of how to get to your website or your Instagram will be in the show notes. But are there any other ways that you want to specify people can work with you, or just any final thoughts? It can be however you'd like to put a little bow on this moment.
Yeah, so if you want to follow along with more thoughts like what I shared here, I'm active mainly on Instagram and Instagram threads. You can get your chart for free on my website if that feels correct for you. You can join my email list if you want to hear more things like this. And then, yeah, I offer readings, multi-session coaching, but even just like a self-paced course that kind of breaks down the starting human design jargon in a very conversational way. That's what I've been told. So that's a reasonably priced offer. You can get that on my website. But mostly, um, just I love to talk and I love people giving me things to respond to. So find me on the internet and ask me some questions.
Well, and I am the self-proclaimed like a queen of not knowing how to end things normally. So I like to always invite people in for it's usually something acoustic based, right? I'm high sound. And so I would love if and obviously no is a valid answer. If you could share a sound of like what your sacral response is to the idea of like every appointment you have that you like didn't want to do, let's say the next week is canceled, right? Or just a moment where like rest and like room to prioritize yourself suddenly happens, like what kind of sound outwardly might someone hear if your sacral could exude that? And then I'll share one based off of what my sort of mental projector in my head would feel like if there was just suddenly no thoughts for a moment.
There's so many sounds. It's like more like a little melody, but probably what
Cool.
just comes out is like, yeah, like up in there.
Wonderful. And if my brain ever slowed the fuck down, it would actually, so I'm hearing a very like, which is funny, I didn't think it'd be this. I'm hearing like a squeaky, squeak, squeak on a window sound. Like it'd be like, is this thing on? Because there'd be almost like an alarm that being ADHD and a protector that there was nothing happening. So if any of you come across Karen and I in the wild, right, and you hear a beautiful melody from her, or I sound like a squeaky window, we are okay. Thank you for checking in. So as always, everyone, have a razzle dazzle day. And if that's not accessible, you put an F on front and have a frazzle dazzle day. And we will see you next time.